Good evening, and welcome to NBNA Real Talk, COVID-19 Vaccine Confidence and Acceptance. This session is sponsored by Johnson & Johnson, National Black Nurses Association, and blackdoctor.org. My name is Michelle Jean Sims, and I'll serve as the moderator. The panel will discuss the significance of COVID-19 hesitancy, confidence, and acceptance among African American nurses. Through a question and answer format, our experts will explain the disease, treatment modalities, implications for vulnerable populations, vaccine confidence, clinical trial participation, and the role of advocacy in healthcare. And now let me introduce our distinguished panelists. Dr. Martha A. Dawson is the 13th president of the National Black Nurses Association and is an associate professor at the University of Alabama at Birmingham School of Nursing. She is a co-convener of the National Black Coalition Against COVID. Recently, she was appointed to the National Commission on Racism in Nursing and the Advisory Board of Direct Relief Health Equity Fund. Under her leadership, the Nursing and Health System Administration track at UAB School of Nursing was ranked #1 in the United States, and over the past decade, the School of Nursing has been ranked consistently in the nation's top 10. In 2019, Dr. Dawson was inducted into the Alabama Nurses Hall of Fame. Next, we have Dr. Linda Washington Brown, who is the Vaccine Program Coordinator at the Miami Rescue Mission Clinic. She is the immediate past president of the Miami Chapter Black Nurses Association and currently chairs the National Black Nurses Association Diversity and Inclusivity Committee. Dr. Washington Brown is a former member of the Health and Human Services Vaccine Panel. Presently, she co-chairs the AANP Equity and Diversity Special Interest Group, as well as co-chairing the AANP Nomination Council. Next, we have Dr. Sheldon D. Fields. He is a research professor and associate dean for equity and inclusion in the College of Nursing at Penn State University. And he has 30 years of experience in various positions within the healthcare sector. Dr. Fields is a well-known and respected HIV/AIDS prevention research scientist with a significant focus on young men of color. He is a fellow of the American Academy of Nursing, the American Association of Nurse Practitioners, and the National Academies of Practice. Dr. Fields is a lifetime member of the NBNA and currently serves as the organization's national first vice president. Mr. Michael S. Fitz. Mr. Fitz serves as Assistant Dean for User Access and Diversity of UAB Libraries and is past president of the African American Faculty Association at UAB. In 2011, at the age of 38, he was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's disease. Currently, he is active within the PD community, including the executive board of the Parkinson Association of Alabama and the Michael J. Fox Patient Council. Mr. Fitz is passionate concerning patient advocacy and being an example to underrepresented communities about living well with any chronic condition and the importance of participating in clinical trials. And finally, we have Ms. Sasha Willington Harris. Ms. Harris is a frontline nurse at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, managing a COVID designated nursing unit. She is a member of both the Birmingham Nurses Association and the National Black Nurses Association. Currently, Ms. Willington Harris is pursuing an executive doctor of nursing practice degree from UAB. I want to welcome the panelists. And during any point in the session, we welcome you, our audience, to post questions or just interact with one another in the chat feature. We'll have approximately 15 minutes at the end of our session to address questions. And now we'll begin with Dr. Washington Brown. Dr. Brown worked in vaccinology long before COVID. So tell us, what is the COVID-19 virus?
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle, and to all of our other panelists. COVID-19 is a positive stranded ribonucleic acid, better known as RNA, virus of the coronavirus family. As we have heard, I'm sure many times, it was discovered in Wuhan, China in 2019. It is the seventh isolated human coronavirus identified. There are several others, the 229, NL63, and I'm not going to name them all, but there are others. The human coronavirus disease occurs worldwide, meaning it's endemic and pandemic. It refers to this large family of viruses known to be zoonotic, meaning that it's transmitted from animals to humans, and it causes a variety of respiratory illnesses, from the common cold to more severe diseases, such as we've already experienced MERS COVID and SARS COVID, which now we have SARS COVID-2. Now, the coronaviruses are named because of their appearance in the electron microscope. And what do you see there? It shows these elliptic virions on the surface, projections, and they look like crowns, which show spikes. And it's from the Latin word crown. So that's pretty much where the name came from. However, the World Health Organization actually issued the interim name for COVID-19 as we know it. And what happened is that because it originated in 2019, this is where we get the 2019 from. The N with that indication is because it is a novel virus. And of course, COVID, meaning that it follows the SARS COVID-1 that we've already experienced. So pretty much that's what COVID-19 is, and that's how it got its name.
Thank you. I have a few more questions. Tell us, why is a larger percentage of Black and other minority patient communities being infected with COVID more and having poorer outcomes?
Well, Michelle, it's really important for us to remember that prior to the pandemic, people of color had higher rates of health conditions. We were more likely to be uninsured, face barriers to accessing health care, and we were more likely to have lower incomes as well as face financial challenges. And of course, these underlying disparities put people of color at more of an increased risk for exposure to the virus, experiencing serious illnesses if they were infected. So what we've seen now is the health and economic impacts of COVID-19 further widen that racial disparity at a time when there was a growing focus on a call for racial justice and health equity. So what did we see with this? Well, there were multiple analyses that were conducted both at the federal, state, or I should say at the federal, state, and local, because there are three areas of data that showed that people of color were experiencing, of course, a disproportionate burden of COVID-19 cases. And this was with the minority groups as we know them today: Black, African Americans, American Indians, Alaskan Natives, and those that were in many cases of the Hispanics. So what did we attribute that to, and what were we seeing? Well, when they analyzed the data, it was found that these different populations had higher rates of exposure, they had higher rates of cases, and they also had higher rates of death. This was problematic. And so we also saw that among the Asian groups as well. So it wasn't just us as Blacks and African Americans. And when we looked at the age adjusted rates, not only did we see this in the hospitalizations, but people of color in the hospitals were dying at a higher rate. The people of color in nursing homes were dying at a higher rate. And again, we are finding that it's mainly because a lot of the information that was needed was not disseminated properly to the people of color and to the underserved and inner city areas. The testings were not as available to people of color. And then when it was time now for vaccine administration, again, and I had shared this before, is that the pharmacies and the areas where they were actually releasing these vaccines were not in the areas where we find predominantly African American people. So as we understand the variation in those testing and also those rates, we have come to understand that we as people of color were actually marginalized when the initial rollout of these vaccines, and as well as testing and opportunities for hospitalization and treatment.
Thank you. Will you explain to us briefly how the COVID vaccines work?
Yes. The COVID vaccines, as we know them today, we have two, which we refer to as the messenger RNA vaccines. These are synthetic vaccines, and they are enclosed in what we call a lipid nanoparticle. And what they do is that they actually enter into the cell through the injection itself, and it's protected from the body's own antibody or watchdog system from being detected until it's in the cell. It unravels at that point in time. And then when the body recognizes that it's there, then it also now creates the antibodies that is needed to protect you from the actual virus itself. Now, as you know, there are several vaccines that are out. We have the two mRNAs, which is the Pfizer and the Moderna, and they all have their specifications, one 3 weeks apart, the other 4 weeks apart. And with that, these vaccines are showing a 95% sensitivity and specificity. And not only that, they are actually now doing what we asked them to do. People are being protected from the COVID virus. In addition, we had Johnson & Johnson, which, you know, it didn't have the same rate as of protection that was seen in the synthetic two vaccines. However, it was showing somewhere around 67-70% of effectiveness. And of course, we all know that it was pulled because there were some adverse effects coming from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. You also have AstraZeneca. And what we were seeing, and these were called vector type vaccines, meaning you would only need one dose. So when you have the weakened or attenuated vaccines that you receive, these vaccines sometimes can become spiralist, meaning that they can go rogue and they can do other things. They can reactivate themselves. So we were not seeing the same or similar types of results that we were hoping to see from the synthetic vaccines. What does that mean to us? Well, that means that even though we've gotten 2 shots, it means that we may need a booster shot, because how the vaccines work now, as I said, it stimulates what we call our immune globulin M, and that starts initially, and then we get immune globulin G, which we hope will then contain the memory cells that we need, that if we're ever exposed to COVID vaccine, that it immediately protects our bodies. And that also goes for the covariants. We're having these variant types of viruses. And I often tell people, viruses do what they're supposed to do. They mutate. And so what we're seeing are mutations of the COVID-19. But the good news is that we're finding out that the vaccines that have been used is literally protected from the variant viruses that are out there. So I think at this point, if we continue to take these vaccines, I think we're in pretty good shape.
Thank you. What will it take to get more nurses and healthcare providers becoming more confident to accept the vaccine? What is it going to take?
I think it's honesty. We have to be honest with one another. And not only that, we have to remind them that as nurses, we are one of the most trusted professions in this entire nation. Not only that, we are the largest and the strongest group. And so we carry weight with society. When nurses speak to their patients, speak to family members, do community talks, people listen and they believe us. So it is critical for us to be the examples. And so if we talk about how we can get nurses to accept the vaccine, just remember, the world is watching us as nurses, and we are the example setters. We are the ones who say we need to watch what we eat. We need to exercise. We need to get our vaccines. You know, we need to do this, this, this. So we must also be honest with each other and become those leaders in vaccine therapy and administration.
Thank you, Dr. Washington. I had one other question, but you've already answered it. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
The next set of questions will be addressed to Mrs. Sasha Harris, and they will refer to UAB COVID and being a nurse manager on a COVID unit. Ms. Harris, what are some of the safety issues you have to consider for patients? And then what are some safety issues for staff? You're on mute.
That darn mute. We should be used to it by now. So with our patients, one of the biggest things that we have to consider, of course, is their respiratory status, especially between day 7 and 10 of having the virus. That's usually when we see the biggest turn of if they're going to be able to really go home and be okay, or if they're going to turn for the worse and have to go to the ICU. So their respiratory status, how they're doing cognitively, socially, because they don't have anybody. It's lonely. It's lonely when you have COVID and you're in a hospital with no visitors. The only person you see is a nurse, but you really can't see their face. So that is one thing that we are concerned with. And now we finally have the chaplain coming in and have people coming in to address those issues that we've been seeing that's been making our patient outcomes worse. And then with our staff, we test every patient that comes into the hospital. And sometimes you have your guard down because you're like, oh, they don't have any symptoms. They're fine. They don't have COVID. And then we'll end up getting a positive result after the entire unit's been exposed and been in that patient's room. So that's really been the biggest thing, is making sure we keep our guard up every time, especially with our cases going down. We're starting to get a little bit more relaxed. So to really make sure that our staff stay on top of it.
Thank you. What are some things that hospital associates need to know about vaccine confidence, vaccine acceptance?
You know, at UAB, it really has not been a problem. We are 80% vaccinated, and we are the biggest employer in the state of Alabama. So I feel that we are doing our part, and we really pushed it. So when you got an email to say, hey, here's your invitation for your vaccine, they didn't give you time to change your mind. Like when you said, okay, I'm signing up, you probably had an appointment later that day or the next day. So you had an appointment very quickly to get you started and get the ball rolling. So they were very efficient with it. And people really had confidence. Like our top physicians were like, hey, I'm going to get my vaccine. So everybody who trusted them went ahead and did it because they saw people do it by example.
Thank you. Because you work directly with patients and supervise nurses, what are some common symptoms patients complain about when they contact COVID?
Well, of course, fever, chills, cough, shortness of breath. One that really shocked people at the beginning was COVID diarrhea. They were going to the restroom all the time and was like, what is wrong with me? And sometimes that would be their only symptom. But in reality, if they test our bowel, that would test positive before a nasal swab would. So, of course, the diarrhea, congestion, runny nose, sore throat.
Thank you. And last question. In your opinion, what have the health system, your staff, and you learned during this pandemic?
We have learned that we are so resilient, that, we're going to get through it. We haven't been through a pandemic before, and now we know, okay, we can get through this and we can do this with each other. That you really have to have your support system. You have to, administration really have to support the front line, be there for them, and go every step of the way to make it happen. But with each other's support and getting through this, and then with the community helping by staying at home when it first started and really being safe, washing your hands, wearing your mask, that really has helped us. So it's so much that mandating things really help.
Thank you so much, Ms. Harris. Our next set of questions are going to go to Dr. Sheldon Fields, and they are going to concern HIV/AIDS, population COVID, and ongoing clinical trials. So, Dr. Fields, We keep hearing some patients have pre-existing conditions that place them at greater risk of contracting COVID. Can you explain if this is true for patients with HIV/AIDS, and are they at greater risk?
So thank you for the opportunity to talk. Initially, those of us who have been working in HIV really were concerned that, we were working with a group of patients with compromised immune systems, and we were really scared for our patients. We initially thought that they were at an increased risk. But what we came to find out was, true to fact, if the patients had been on their antiretroviral medications and their HIV was under control and their T cell count was up, we did not see a increased risk or a large number of HIV patients being co-infected with COVID. And if you remember, one of the medications that was tested early on in COVID, called remdesivir, is an antiretroviral medication. So we suspected that our patients were somewhat protected. But if your immune system was so severely compromised, and or you were dealing with any of the sequelae of HIV that also dealt with respiratory issues, like if you had pneumocystis pneumonia or something like that, yes, you were at an increased risk. But generally speaking, the population of HIV patients was not at an increased risk the way in which we thought they might originally have been, which was a good thing.
Thank you. Would you advise HIV/AIDS patients to participate in COVID-19 clinical trials?
Yes, we actually did, because we needed to know for sure if, any thing that was developed was going to work for this subset of patients as well. So we actually did encourage people who were stable with their HIV to be involved in some of the clinical trials. And some of them were. And the good thing about this is we know that the vaccines are being effective in this vulnerable population. And why this was so necessary is anyone who understands the pandemic about HIV also understands that it disproportionately affects the African American and Latin populations. So the same group of individuals who are at increased risk for COVID. So we really, really needed to make sure. And we are encouraging everyone in that population to get vaccinated. And we are seeing some really good results because they're not getting sick.
Thank you. We've been hearing recently quite a bit of information about other vaccines that are being given. Are the current vaccines riskier for this particular population?
No. The current vaccines that are on the market, the ones that are approved, are not riskier for this population. The question does become, though, and I get this a lot from people who say to me, well, Dr. Fields, we've been looking for an HIV vaccine for 40 years and we haven't found one. Why did they find a vaccine for COVID so quickly? And one of the things I like to point out is the fact that we have been looking and developing vaccines for decades. So we knew how to develop vaccines. We had the technology, we had the methodology to develop these vaccines. And there was a worldwide effort to bring forth these vaccines for COVID. There was also an intentional, and here's the key word, intentional investment of resources, real dollars, by our federal government through Operation Warp Speed that really helped along the process. It was in collaboration with the pharmaceutical companies, And remember, this was happening worldwide, and scientists were sharing information with each other. So, yes, we were able to still stay true to the scientific process of vaccine development, but we condensed processes. We did processes at the same time, and we were able to speed up the process. So the vaccines are indeed safe because they were put through all of the same processes that we ordinarily would use. We were just able to do it a lot quicker. So yes, they are safe.
Thank you, Dr. Fields. And now we're going to turn to Mr. Michael Fitz, and he's going to respond to questions about clinical trials. Mr. Fitz, I understand that you've participated in clinical trials in the past. Can you share with us what type of clinical trials you've participated in and why you decided to participate?
Certainly. Well, one challenge that I had once I got diagnosed with Parkinson's is there were several different events and meetings and things to go to, and they always really kind of push the fact that you need to take part in special clinical trials. The issue with that and the challenge with that is, first of all, if you're talking about like doing clinical trials on some individuals, especially individuals of color, sometimes they're kind of wary of that. We're kind of wary of that, and because of what has happened historically. So one thing that I tried to do, I guess the squeaky wheel gets the oil, is to constantly say, I would participate in clinical trials if you give me an opportunity, or if I can fall into the category. So one of the things that used to disqualify me is simply my age, because as you know, Parkinson's tends to develop in more seasoned people. I didn't want to say old, more seasoned people. And so that was a challenge for me. The other thing that happened was it seemed as though they wanted people that had Parkinson's for a year, but had not started taking medication. I was out of that one too. So finally, when I turned the right age, which I think it was either 40 or 45, I started getting all these phone calls as far as like, we want you to do this clinical trial. We want to tell you more about it. So the first clinical trial I did had to do with telemedicine, telehealth. And so I would be up in my office, had monitors hooked up to me and an iPad, and somebody remotely would work me through these exercises to see how that was going to go and if there was any difference between having somebody to observe you doing it by yourself as opposed to going to a traditional gym. So the types of clinical trials, that's how I started. Pretty soon I'm going to be doing another one, an upcoming one, and it has to do with trying to help improve sleep. So they're going to be doing what they call light treatments. So that's what I'm going to be working on next.
Thank you, Mr. Fitz.
Certainly.
Another question for you. Will you share how the researchers or physicians interacted with you prior to, during, and after the trials? What was their relationship like?
Well, I must admit, because I had been around, so to speak, I think I had a better working relationship with the clinicians because, obviously there's not very many people of color that suffer with it and, at my age. And so they kind of already knew me, and they knew me because I kept complaining, like, I would do the clinical trial if you would give me an opportunity and I fall into the categories. So I must admit, my treatment is probably just a little bit different. And I work at the University of Alabama, where they have really world-renowned experts, just like some of my colleagues on the panel. So my relationship with them was really good, and I was able to kind of take part in what I need to. And they would actually call me personally. Sometimes you would have like your assistant call, but they would call themselves, which I think that's very important as well.
Thank you. For those that didn't have that type of relationship, that familiarity, would you share what you would recommend?
Absolutely. One of the things I could recommend is you really have to have a good information around you, because like I said, a lot of people depend on Dr. Google, and Dr. Google does not know everything. In fact, Dr. Google could have you messed up somewhere, honestly. So, once again, I'm a little biased. So the people that might not have that particular luxury, there's plenty of legitimate information things on the computer that you can find online. One that I would recommend is Medline Plus, and the URL is medlineplus.org. And see, that's more of a consumer page to give people like more practical information, because I know, I'm sure none of you all do this as researchers. Sometimes you can really talk over people's heads and they don't know exactly what you're talking about. The other thing that I would really, really encourage, and this is kind of like the initial step that I would do, is basically see if you can find a support group. Participate in a support group with other individuals that can understand what you're going through. It could really do tremendous things for your health and just your whole attitude altogether.
Thank you, Mr.
Certainly.
Now we have Dr. Martha Dawson, who's our final panelist, and her responses are going to focus on clinical trial advocacy and coalition building. So let's start off, Dr. Dawson, with what is clinical trial advocacy?
Clinical trial advocacy really is supporting those individuals that are going to participate in research. And there are always different phases of research. And I really like to thank my colleague, Mr. Fix. He did such a wonderful job talking about participating in clinical trials and what that is about. The first thing I would say is that when you're going to participate in a clinical trial, try to educate yourself. Not only by asking questions of the research coordinators, and usually they will have sometime a nurse in that role that are recruiting individuals to participate in the research. But also, again, look for those trusted sources, such as your primary care physician, a nurse in your community, and then those groups that can support you. But what a clinical trial really consists of is you started to participate as the human subject in that trial. That means that some physician or scientists have already started developing whatever treatment modality that they are going to use, whether it be medication or a surgical procedure. So they've done some testing in the lab before they began to bring in human subjects to actually then try out that medication. So, and the goal is to make sure that whatever they are investigating and trying to develop is going to be safe for use with humans. So that's whether it's medication again, or surgical procedure. We want to make sure that it's safe before we go into the larger population. So every clinical trial study is going to have a research and a patient advocate involved in that with the study team. And the goal is to make sure that they are following the design that they've already developed in the early phase of their innovation.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. And it has been said that coalition building is important in healthcare. Why is that? Why is coalition building important?
Coalition building is very important, and that's one of the things that NBNA, the National Black Nursing Association, tried to do, is to make sure that we're in the right places at the right time, and that we are advocating not only for our nurses, but for our patients, as well as for our population and our community. Because when you advocate for someone, that means you have their best interests at heart. So, for example, during this pandemic, we have been working with some of the pharmaceutical companies. We've been working with other medical personnel, whether we are talking about those individuals that may be at our historical Black colleges and university medical schools, such as Howard University, Meharry University, Morehouse School of Medicine, and the Charles Drew Medical School out in California. And the other thing that we try to do when we are advocating is, again, make sure that we are well educated on the science and that we understand. So you've heard Dr. Linda Brown Washington speak about the science tonight. You also heard Dr. Fields talk about the science as it relates to a specific patient population. So it is extremely important that we as African Americans, that we're out there helping to help our population and our people understand about not just this pandemic, but other issues and medications and concerns that they may have. Because we know that at the beginning of this pandemic, instead of us receiving very solid and sound information, and we weren't able to really listen to the scientists, we weren't hearing that many voices of the Black and brown physicians and nurses and pharmacists. So we spent a lot of time trying to just dispel the misinformation that was out there. And misinformation is when someone really doesn't know what they're talking about, but they're giving out wrong information. But it may not be their intention. They just don't know. But our biggest problem during this pandemic actually was the disinformation that we had to deal with. And that is people putting out incorrect information and they knew that it was incorrect. So it's very important that we, as individual nurses and collectively as a profession and a professional association, that we are out there educating and advocating for our population.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and thank you to all the panelists. We are now at the close of our presentations, and now we're ready to field questions from the audience. This is one question. How long after the initial vaccine will boosters be necessary? Who would like to respond?
I can respond. Yeah, the booster vaccine timetable right now is still unknown. And the reason it is unknown is because we're still under what we call the emergency use authorization, meaning that we're still in an experimental stage. And hopefully people will remember that. We are in what we call phase 4. Phase 4 is where you have these large, huge populations. In other words, the country. That's what we're doing. So actually, we don't know. As the data is collected, as we learn more about how people are responding to the vaccine, then it will later be determined when, how long, and if we will need the boosters.
Thank you. We have another question. Have those of us that have been around others with COVID but remain negative possibly have built up antibodies?
I can do that one too, if you like. And then I'll turn it over to my colleagues because I know they have answers. And I was trying to write it out. The purpose of the vaccination, of course, is to produce an immune response. And that's to determine the amount of antibodies that are present in an individual who received the COVID-19. So that's important. So it's determined by what we call an antibody titer. And most of us have had titers. If you've ever had a disease and they want to know, are you still protected? They'll draw a titer. So in like manner, that's what will happen to determine how well you protected. But however, we cannot use that barometer as the sole way we look at this. So if an individual has received the vaccine, is exposed to COVID-19 positive individuals, that immune person should be protected, but that doesn't necessarily mean they will be protected. So barring any other underlying conditions or other factors, they should be protected, but that's not always the guarantee. And I defer to my colleagues because I know they know a lot more than I do.
Would anyone else like to add?
I'd just like to add that people need to remember that, as we stated, we are just moving into this treatment phase with a larger population. So you don't want to take risk. And I know sometimes people hear us and they say, because I had someone ask me, well, you know, if it's not going to heal me and make me 100% well, why should I take it? That's when you have to step back and look at the data. When you look at the million of people that have received the vaccine, and yes, I've received both of my doses, and you look at what we would call the side effects, or some of the event that we did not expect to see during our clinical trial, they are so much less than what we're dealing with the COVID. And even, we started off this year seeing a drop in the number of cases. We started vaccinating. We saw even more of a drop. Then the weather started getting warmer and people started relaxing a little bit. And now we're seeing that go back up. Even in my state, the number of cases are going up again. This is not a type of virus. And there's a reason why we're calling it a pandemic and not an epidemic, which means it just got a small population of people that is affected. This is around the whole world. And so when we get too comfortable too soon and think, well, I don't need to wear my mask, I don't need to avoid large crowds, I don't need to continue to wash my hand, okay, then we begin to see the cases go up again. And the one thing we know is that over 1 million people have died, compared to the few side effects that we have been hearing about on the news about, people that might have had an adverse effect. Compare that to over 500 million individuals. And that's why we're here tonight, still talking about this, still trying to educate. And again, this is part of our public policy stand. We're lobbying for people to do the right thing. We're saying, no, we're not, if I may just be a little country here, we're not out of the woods yet, okay? So we need to keep doing the right thing. And again, the more people we can get vaccinated, the more protected we all are. And that's what we have to do.
Yeah. So I want to jump in here real quick because Dr. Dawson's absolutely right. 314,000 cases were reported in a single day in India. So yes, this is around the entire world. This is still going on. And one of the things that Dr. Brown said, which is related to the reason why the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was pulled temporarily off the market, because we are still in an experimental phase. And it was a good thing that the Johnson & Johnson was paused so that they can take a look at the data, really figure out what happened with those 6 unique cases, and really see if it was anything that the vaccine actually caused itself. So, but I also want to say this about that vaccine. In the grand scheme of things, the number of people who had already received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine who had no problems, those 6 individuals, when we put it into a scientific statistical model, are infinitesimal. And while it may not rise to the level of statistical significance, they did the right thing by pausing it. They're going to take a look, but I will bet you that we are going to see the Johnson & Johnson vaccine back in the market after they do their analysis. And yes, I do believe it is still safe. And like Dr. Dawson, I too have been vaccinated, fully vaccinated, and didn't really have a problem.
And again, I think that because they pulled the Johnson & Johnson for further review is a testament to effective advocacy
and safety,
and also protecting the public, because that's what we're supposed to do. And I don't want people to say, oh, but it's so bad they had to pull it off the market. I want you to go back, if you're old enough, and remember when we had the problem with the Tylenol, where somebody went in and tainted some of the Tylenol, what did that company do? They just said, let's pull off all of the Tylenol from every store until we can figure out what's going on. Now, they found out that it had nothing to do with their development, but someone else was going around putting something into the Tylenol. But again, that's what good science and good practice and being concerned and have an advocate and someone speaking for you. That's our role. We want to say, okay, it's time for us to step back and let's review. And that's exactly what the CDC and the FDA and Dr. Fauci and his team did. Said, we need to step back. Now, that is a giant step for science.
The system worked. The system worked.
Yes.
And again, it was Johnson & Johnson, the makers of Tylenol.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. We're going to switch gears a little with this next question, which is, do you feel it is valid for nurses to have concerns about the vaccine?
I can start it out, and then I'm going to have Sasha and whoever. I think it's valid for us to question anything that's presented to us. Right. Nothing's wrong with questioning and determining the validity of information that we receive. You know, sometimes you can't, they say, can you believe your eyes or what you hear? So just to start it out, I think it's valid for any of us to question anything that's presented to us until we have done our homework and examine the facts and understand what it is that's being presented to us. And then I'll defer to my colleagues here.
And I will agree with you. And I will add to that is nurses, physicians, pharmacists, we're just like everyone else. But it is our responsibility to weigh the odds. Look at the information. And if you are a frontline nurse, your potential for being exposed to this virus is probably 100 or 1,000% more than mine. At this time in my career, I'm a faculty person. I'm educating on administration. I'm not in the clinical site. I'm not in the hospital. My university said, you're not considered essential to be on campus, so you protect everyone else and stay at home. And trust me, that's where I've been. I don't go out shopping just because I'm remotely. But now, if I was sitting here still saying, but I'm not going anywhere, so I should not take the vaccine. But is this where I want to spend the rest of my life? No. So I went and I took the vaccine. So I think people have to ask the question about, am I at greater risk by not taking it, or should I take it? I know I was having this conversation with my colleague, Sasha, just the other day, and she said, well, you know, because I was saying to her, I keep hearing people say that nurses are not taking it. So what happened with your institution? She said, we have over 2,000 and some nurses, and I think over 80%, you know, took the vaccine. We did just a short survey with our membership, and I would say under 300 members, but over 88% probably said, yes, they already had their vaccine. So we are seeing this. And so I would say to people, you have to think about your loved ones. Do you want to be around them? Do you want to protect them if you have older parents or aunts or grandparents that you're concerned about? If you have younger kids, because the other day I heard on the news that at this time they're seeing a faster rate of infection among the children that are under 12 years old. Now, this is a group we have to protect because they are our future. Exactly. We have to protect those that are over 12 to 22 because guess what? They're moving into puberty, and some of them are getting ready maybe to start families if they're in their 20s. So there are all sort of reasons for us to be protected and for us to participate.
Exactly.
And I would say, being a nurse manager, being over nurses, that's absolutely human to have concerns. And that's okay. You weigh your pros and your cons. My husband is an IT guy. And he was like, I can't believe you're getting that vaccine because I have an infant. I have a 2-month-old. I'm breastfeeding. I still got the vaccine. I am fully vaccinated. And I'm like, Lord, let them get some passive immunity. Let's get this done, you know, and let me do what I can to protect my family and my grandmother and my mother and everybody. So I had to weigh the pros and cons. And then with my husband, as my husband always say, for people that are not medical, because he is not nowhere near it, he always say, well, let me see how I do the other people first. And we are just fine. You know, and now he is fully vaccinated as well after I had to convince him. But it's okay. You know that majority of us are doing great. The statistics are in our favor. We're young, we're in it, and we're in the mud with this COVID. Like we see it every single day. You don't know when you're going to Walmart. I'm sure you're being exposed to COVID. So just the little things in life that we still have to do because we still have to live. But we cannot keep living in fear. We have to fight this head on and get a vaccination so we can do what we have to do and get some kind of normalcy back.
And that's great. I just want to add to what Sasha was talking about with the breastfeeding. We are seeing this with the scientists now saying that mothers are passing the protected antibodies on to their babies. So that is another plus. That means her son has a head start on being protected because she was sensitive enough to go ahead and get the vaccine. So now her son is being protected with that.
Mr. Fitz, did you want to add?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in for a moment. So I'll be totally transparent with you all, my colleagues. I had no intention of going to get that vaccine. And, I started doing some research and then listening to my colleagues, especially Dr. Dawson. And I asked myself, what is the alternative? So you mean to tell me that you're not going to take the vaccine because you're going to wait and see what happens? Do you not see how many people have died? Mm-hmm. I mean, come on, folks. We need to do better.
Thank you.
And thank you. And one of the things that I would share with people too, and I know sometimes they don't share too much of your personal business, but I had 2 pre-existing conditions, hypertension and I'm a diabetic. And I know a lot of people look at me and say, you're too small to have hypertension. Hypertension doesn't care about that. Okay.
Right.
But the fact is that I had both of those pre-existing conditions and I did fine. I had none of the symptoms. Everybody had me all psyched up. When you get the first one, you're going to be okay. Oh, but that second one, you're going to have chills. You're going to have muscle aches. You're going to hot 1 minute and cold the next minute. I went to get my second shot. I came home. I went for a walk. I was feeling so good. I went to bed. I thought, okay, it's probably going to hit me overnight and I'll wake up with it. When I woke up the next morning, I still have not had any problems. My arm wasn't even sore with the second one. And so my sister was teasing me. She said, are you sure they didn't just give you water? And then when she had her second one, it didn't faze her either. I said, so I guess we both got water.
Thank you. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. This next question has to do with perhaps those on college campuses. What are your thoughts on mandating getting vaccinated, particularly in college students?
Okay, so I'm an associate dean at a really large university, 45,000 plus students on our main campus alone. So we have a long history in education of mandating vaccinations in order to attend school. So, I don't want us to turn this into a political debate about civil liberties. We're in the middle of a public health crisis. And if students are going to be students, they're going to intermingle, they're going to do whatever it is they're doing. And yes, every university had their rules about distancing and, class online. And even if it was in person, mask wearing, but students are still going to be students. So I say we must encourage on any level that the students now get vaccinated. They're all eligible, especially those 18 and over. They're all 16 and over. They're all eligible, particularly our health science students, our nursing students. They all got to go back into clinical. So yes, though for them in particular, we should be mandating vaccination. That's just where I am with this at this point.
Mr. Fitz?
Okay, I'll try to be brief. Okay, I work with students every day. I'm not in the classroom, but I work in the libraries. I can't tell you how many times I'll be on my way to the desk or to the restroom or something. Okay, first of all, they don't have the mask on. Then they'll try to put it up when they hear me coming. And I'm like, I just don't understand. I think they think that they're invincible, but they really aren't. And so we had the whole 6-foot rule. Most of them must have thought I said 6 inches because they're practically sitting on people's lap. Oh, but this is my roommate. This is my girlfriend. Well, not in here. I need for you to follow the protocol. Okay, I'm gonna be quiet now. Sorry.
Dr. Brown?
Uh-oh, you're on mute, Dr. Brown. Mute.
You're on
Can't
mute.
hear.
We're still not hearing her.
Dr. Brown, you're still on mute.
Okay, got it. I was trying to, Sasha. I knew it was there somewhere. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that because that question, I serve on an expert medical panel for our reentry to schools here locally. And that question came up. And this is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart when we talk about mandating, required, and recommended. All vaccines are recommended. That's the first thing. That's the federal government, the CDC, they cannot require. They have to recommend. Now, we can require certain things for certain populations. And like Dr. Field said, you know, the mandate at the college. However, the problem with this is that you're going to have the what ifs or the exceptions to the rule. So that kind of knocks that mandate part. It kind of waters it down somewhat. You can require it. So all of those persons that fit those recommendations, you know, that allows for them to be vaccinated, then they would fit into that category. And for those that can't, then you have the exceptions to the rule where we really have to consider what happens with the exception to the rules, because everyone may not be eligible literally to take this vaccine. So we have to kind of navigate it very carefully. But I agree that these college students really need this vaccine. However, to have a mandate may be pretty strong, and that you can require it like we do. Either get me a titer, you know, you have it, show some proof, or if you can't, then provide me with documentation why you cannot. And so that would be something moving forward.
And I think people need to also understand that we may not mandate something, but then your employer may require it the same as they require.
Exactly.
And I have heard some colleges already saying that, yes, before they're going to let students back in the fall, they want those students to be vaccinated. And I know one particular, and I won't call that particular name, but it was on national news, but I still won't call the name of the university. And they clearly just said, because of the outbreak and what they saw over spring break, that they would mandate that if the student is coming to their campus in the fall, that we want proof that they all have been vaccinated. And I think, again, they're trying to not only protect the students, but they're looking at the exposure to the faculty. And I know some of the faculty are saying, well, they don't want to do it. And some people are saying, well, you know, they're still fearful. But one of the things I would say, the uptake of individuals now saying they would take the vaccine has increased.
Yes.
When we first started this conversation around about this time last year, when they were still working on developing the vaccine, in our own African American community, probably no more than around about 7 to 8% was saying they would take it. Then that needle moved to 14%, and then 30%. Today it's almost at 40%. And so again, I think we have to think about this from a long-term perspective, because the thing that is out there as well is all of the subsequent problems that people who have contacted this virus are beginning to report and that we are beginning to monitor. So you have to think about it from that perspective. If you get it, what's going to be some of the long-term medical issues and other things you may have to deal with.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Dawson. And we have about maybe 30 seconds or less. I'd like you each to think of one powerful word or sentiment that you would give concerning COVID-19 vaccines. Just one word, short phrase that you would like to send out. And what would it be?
You are not only protecting yourself, but your family, your neighbors, and your community by taking the vaccine.
Dr. Fields?
It's not over.
Ms. Harris?
It's not over. We have to do this for the rest of our community.
Mr. Fitz?
Cooperation.
And Dr. Dawson?
Don't let others' emotion guide your decision.
And with that, we've come to the end of our session. Thank you very much. And we hope that everyone listened carefully and will follow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.